He was one of the most hurtful punchers in the history of the heavyweight division.
I know the art of fight, I know the art of war.
It was something that people hadn't seen, and that's what made him exciting. That's what made him a fan favourite.
He became a symbol of don't mess with me.
My hero was Mike Tyson. Yeah, that guy is crazy.
He won most fights before he even got in the ring.
There was something in that Mike Tyson personality that was always going to erupt at some stage.
I loved who he was in the ring, not outside of the ring.
He had this aura, he had this presence that was unlike anything you'd ever seen before.
Nobody believed this man could ever be beaten.
The key figure in his early life as a boxer was his mentor and trainer called Cus D'Amato.
Being a kid who was getting in a lot of trouble, always told you you're just going to be a criminal, to find someone who can tell you, no, you're going to be heavyweight champion of the world, actually. Mike Tyson said how many days and how many times Cus D'Amato had to repeat this and drill it into him until he believed it.
Cus D'Amato's one of his sayings was, feed the fire, becomes a flame.
I remember my dad saying, this kid, you need to watch him. He's a heavyweight, he's something else, he's special. He was just steamrolling through people.
That was like, yeah, this guy must be special. I wanted to be like that.
I was very deep into the boxing game at that time, and there were rumblings about this kid that was coming out of New York. I was instantly a fan. When I saw him fight, I became obsessed with Tyson.
If you look back through the history of heavyweight boxing, Muhammad Ali and Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis and George Foreman and Joe Frazier, Rocky Marciano, and here you had the man who beat them all to the world title. I just say to everybody, just remember what you were doing at 20.
Electrifying, you know, when you watched him fight and come out and couldn't be beaten, and he's like some sort of gladiator. I guess he inspired a whole generation.
His mindset was, you will land, but when I do, I'm going to hurt you more.
For him to have established such a presence in the world in a time where there was no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook, it kind of puts into perspective how huge he must have been.
By the time he became world heavyweight champion, Cus D'Amato had died, and that left a huge hole in his life.
Really, I think if Cus was around for longer, Mike could have achieved much more, because it seemed like he lost his head a bit when Cus unfortunately died.
There is a theory that Cus D'Amato became so fond of Mike Tyson that he allowed Mike Tyson to get away with various misdemeanors. So some say that if Cus D'Amato had been more of a disciplinarian outside the ring as well as inside the ring, it might have made a difference.
Of course you want to be a world champion, make as much money as soon as possible, but in terms of life development, in terms of how you treat people, how you spend your money, all of that would have been, terrible. That done him no good at all.
If Cus D'Amato was still alive, I do believe Tyson would have achieved way more. Tyson had to learn to live without him.
I think there was something in that Mike Tyson personality that was always going to erupt at some stage, and whoever was around him, I think, would have struggled to keep him in check.
People were starting to get like, oh my God, when you buy a Tyson fight, you know, it doesn't last long enough to enjoy the fight. But that was what sucked you in. That was what you loved. Tyson had everything at that time that made you a superstar.
I think that has to be regarded as the highlight reel performance of his entire career, because that was an illustration of Mike Tyson at his best in the ring, but also how he affected opponents in the build-up to fights.
Such a prime example of how mental boxing is, because, you know, it really is the keystone of his career was fear factor.
I was watching the fight live, and I just remember for days, it was literally all anybody talked about was that Mike Tyson had lost to Buster Douglas.
The baddest man on the planet. You know, you don't expect him to lose. You know, and that loss came from nowhere. And seeing Mike Tyson lose at that time was like, wow, okay, he's a man, he can lose.
It was well documented that he wasn't training properly, he wasn't dedicating his life to the sport.
He'd had problems in his marriage, he'd had all sorts of problems with the team around him. The hindsight shows us that this was a ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode. It was a defeat that was waiting to happen.
Obviously, what he did was wrong. I like him as a fighter. I didn't like him as a person at the time. I do believe if he didn't go to jail, he would be more dominant.
A lot of people wouldn't see Mike in high regard as a fighter because of what he's done outside the ring for me, that it doesn't cloud my judgment of him in the ring.
I've often wondered what we would have seen from Mike Tyson if somebody could have brought him back onto the rails in those years. How special a fighter might we have seen?
I think Tyson's career would have been shorter because I think the fights like Lewis, Holyfield would have happened a lot sooner. And I just believe stylistically, these guys would have beat him at any time.
There were times in Mike Tyson's life when people were saying it couldn't get any lower, but in terms of what he did in the ring, that night was the lowest of the lows in his career because of how he behaved in the face of adversity.
He thought, you know what, I'm going to lose anyway, but you're going to feel some of the pain that you keep making me feel when you headbutt me and you elbow me.
And I remember saying to my dad, he's biting him. And then he obviously done it again and spat it out.
I was actually on my way to my honeymoon, and on the plane, the captain came on and said, Evander Holyfield just beat Mike Tyson. And I remember the whole plane reacting to the news.
Tyson severed part of Holyfield's right ear in one of 2 third-round incidents. Tyson's $30 million purse has also been withheld.
And that was one of the most despicable scenes we've ever seen in a ring. He was given an indefinite ban, but it lasted a year or more, and he was fined millions of dollars by the Nevada State Athletic Commission.
His character didn't allow him to reach the heights that he could have, even though he got to incredible heights still. He's one of the best ever heavyweights, certainly in his prime. One
of the greatest heavyweights of all time. The sport was never bigger than it was when Mike Tyson was the heavyweight champion of the world.
Sometimes I've heard the argument that he didn't really fight anyone of notice.
When Mike Tyson faced adversity against Buster Douglas, when he faced adversity against Evander Holyfield, he failed to overcome it. That's the reservation I have.
If Tyson was around today and his style was new, he'd run the division, in my opinion.
I know from active participation in the sport as a coach in the mid-1980s how remarkably impactful he was. He drove many, many youngsters into gyms to take up boxing because of what he produced in the ring.
Even though we're interested in boxing at all, never watched boxing at all, you knew who Mike Tyson was.
His legacy will never die. It shows you can achieve greatness in the sport and immortality even.
When Mike Tyson walks into a room, the entire place goes, holy Mike Tyson is here. And nobody has more of an aura and that awe to them than Mike Tyson does.
You don't have to know boxing to know Mike Tyson. For him to still have that level of relevancy in 2020, it puts into perspective how huge he must have been back in that day.